Well, rivers are running high out there across parts of southern Alberta following several days of heat. This is the Elbow River near the McLeod Trail Bridge near downtown Calgary. We can see some minor flooding there along the river pathway. Let's get straight into it here. Disclaimer right off the bat, I am not a hydrologist, I'm a weather forecaster. So we're going to be talking about how weather could be influencing flood risk in the coming days in southern Alberta, given that we have a significant rainfall event on tap. So let's start out by looking at this map from rivers.alberta.ca. We can see flood watches along the Pipestone River and the Bow River near Lake Louise and downstream through the Bow Valley, Banff, Canmore into the Ghost Lake. We've got a high stream flow advisory. Already seeing some minor flooding there along the Bow in Banff. That's largely because of the heat here in recent days, and they had a significant snowpack there in the mountains this past winter. And, looking at our May snow survey results, that snowpack still lingering there into the beginning part of May. We can see most of that snow through the winter. It was as soon as you get north of the Crow's Nest Pass, through Kananaskis, Banff, and into Jasper National Parks, well above normal snowpack in this region here. So this is playing a role here, but significant kind of a gradient here in southern Alberta. Night and day difference. You get down into Waterton, southward into the Milk River Basin, down into Montana there. Much below normal snowpack this winter. They had a very dry winter, abysmal snowpack in the western United States there. The gradient here, kind of where those storm tracks, the storm systems were really kind of following along this track here in the winter and totally avoided this area further to the south. So that's the reason why we see that significant discrepancy, and that's playing a big role downstream. We look at our water supply outlook for those same river basins this summer. The result you can see, much above normal flows expected through this summer in the Bow River watershed here. You can see as well above normal through much of the North Saskatchewan, the Red Deer, parts of, the Sheep and the Oldman here. This is, good water coming out of the mountains here, but you get down here completely different into the Milk River Basin. Again, this is our only Canadian river basin that ultimately flows into the Mississippi River and out into the Gulf of Mexico. Very, very dry down here. In fact, so dry that irrigators are not allowed since April 30th to draw water from the Milk River. So that's a little bit of a tense situation down there. We'll see how that might change in the coming days with substantial precipitation possible in this region. But you can just see how dry it is down there. Multi-year drought, 4 or 5 year drought down in far southern Alberta. People's dugouts and ponds completely drying out down there for the first time that many people have observed. So we can see, again, this is going to be playing a big role in that runoff in the coming days here. And the reason why we're seeing such substantial melt all of a sudden, it is fairly typical for spring, but we went from like a cool spring, lots of snow, suddenly to this warmth at the end of May here. So we're seeing this kind of transition into the spring freshet period a little bit early, and it's really off to the races. This is what's called a meteogram here. It's basically just a temperature trace that we're seeing at the Nakiska Ridgetop weather station over the past week or so. And we can see temperatures really since May 22nd have not dropped below freezing. And this station exists at 2,543 meters above sea level. That's up there at the top of one of our most famous ski resorts here in southern Alberta. Temperatures have been warm, and we also have some relatively high humidity. So that's really going to be efficient for melting the snow in the Alpine. So you can see very, very warm conditions in the Alpine, playing a significant role in that rapid melt. If we actually go ahead and look at our snow pillows in some of our spots here, this is Little Elbow Summit in the Elbow River headwaters southwest of Calgary. We can see we've been seeing that rapid melt. Really since the beginning of May, it started with those warming temperatures, but really taking off in the last couple of days here with this warmth here. We can actually go ahead and we'll take a look at 2 more stations. Let's go up to Sunshine Village here. A very substantial snowpack this winter. Last week or so, significant melt. And again, that's kind of melting into that Bow River watershed. And we'll look at one more station here, the Skokie near Lake Louise. And we can really get an idea for why there's a flood watch in that area. Just precipitous decline here. And what this is showing is snow water equivalent. That's basically the amount of water that's stored in the snowpack. So if you were to melt it all at once, this is the level of water that you would have. So, and we're looking at the snow pillow here southwest of Calgary, still 400 millimeters of water stored in that snowpack at that snow station. So, there's still a lot of snow out there to melt, a lot of water to run off into our rivers. So this is going to be a consideration in the coming days. If we actually go ahead and look at some of our hydrographs and just see what the river flows are like. Lake Louise here, we can see we're well above normal flows and our water levels are high and they continue to climb. And we're expecting, it could rise. We're being told the rivers could rise here in the Banff area another foot through Friday as temperatures continue to be warm. Looking at the hydrograph there in Banff, where we're seeing some minor flooding along the river again, well above normal flows and water level there. And we'll take it down here into the Calgary region, looking at Bragg Creek's hydrograph as well, running on the high end of average. But look at this spike here. There were some nearly stationary thunderstorms out in Kananaskis country yesterday afternoon. So I would imagine that's likely the reason we're seeing this significant sudden spike here in those river flows. And you go downstream into Calgary to Sarcee River Bridge here, we can see we saw that spike about 6 hours later, 6 hours downstream of Bragg Creek. Still on the high end of average there, flowing into the dam, but you get downstream of the dam here into, near Sandy Beach, I think, here along the Elbow River in Calgary. Again, this is a controlled flow. That's why you see these steps here, but running above normal here, as it looks like officials are releasing water at the dam to make room for that big influx of water coming in from the mountains. Let's take a look at the weather picture here. And if you saw my last YouTube video, we talked about the omega block pattern here in North America. Notice down here in the southwestern states, now we're going to start here Friday morning. This is midnight tonight, Friday morning, this upper level low. This is going to be ultimately the big weather player in the coming days. But we're seeing this omega block pattern here, shaped like the Greek letter omega. This is the jet stream in the middle part of the atmosphere, about 5 kilometers above the Earth's surface. This little, this upper low is just slowly meandering its way through the western states, and by Sunday starts to approach our region. It is moving very, very slowly. Again, that blocking pattern continues to keep it kind of near stationary for 2 to 3 days. And that is the reason why we're seeing such substantial precipitation totals forecast in our region. It just kind of parks and hangs out there, resulting in a lot of precipitation. This event is really going to begin late Saturday. So this is late Saturday here, rain starting to spread into our region and persisting through Sunday and Monday and Tuesday before it starts to taper off. That, folks, is a long duration precipitation event, and one of the reasons why we're seeing the potential for some substantial precipitation totals as moderate to heavy rain persists for quite a while. We're looking at our ensemble forecasts here from the European and the Canadian here. And when we start to see agreement among model ensembles, we start to gain increased confidence in the timing and the positioning of where the heaviest precipitation is going to be, as well as how heavy that may be. Precipitation tend to be one of the hardest variables to forecast for weather models, but we're seeing some pretty good agreement here. Looks like portions of northern Montana, far southeastern BC, but especially southern and central Alberta, substantial totals, likely 50 to 75 millimeters over a large area of Alberta with this storm system. Locally enhanced totals in far southwestern Alberta, kind of hinting at those southwestern foothills where we may be seeing some upslope effect, enhancing those precipitation totals. Looking again here at another map from COD, this is Alberta, and we can see our surface low pressure system really starts to build and kind of hangs out there in the southeast corner of Alberta, southwestern Saskatchewan for quite a while before it moves on out. In behind that, you're going to be feeling very, very different weather conditions than we've been experiencing with these hot, sweaty conditions. It's going to be cold, very windy, and very wet as this storm system really kind of starts to get going through the late part of the weekend and into early next week. And we're going to be seeing several what are called lifting mechanisms, different ways that we're seeing rising air through the atmosphere, contributing to the kind of the magnitude and the intensity of the precipitation of this storm system, this low pressure system hanging out here. These are winds at about 700 millibars, again, about 3,000 meters above sea level, kind of the highest, the height of the highest peaks of the Rockies west of Calgary. We can see a lot of that wind just piling into the terrain. That's what we call upslope flow. There are several different types of lifting mechanisms ongoing, but that is going to be one of the most important ones here. As you force that air up the slope of the land, it really can enhance your precipitation totals, and that's likely why we're seeing those really enhanced totals likely along the terrain in portions of southwestern Alberta before that system moves its way out. And again, we can see just with this kind of topographical map of Alberta, or this terrain-based map here of Alberta and our river basins, again, Bow River Basin here, Old Man, Milk, and red deer. These ones are going to be probably receiving the most precipitation from this event. But again, high terrain here. These peaks rise upwards of 3,000 meters. And when you get that, that flowing up the slope of the land, it's just like hitting a wall and it's forced upward. Numerical study actually from the 2013 floods indicated that 50% of that precipitation total was the result of the mountains here. So, in other words, had the mountains not been there, you would have only received about half the amount of precipitation we saw from that storm system there. And so taking a look at some potential buffers working in our favor here. There's a couple pluses and there's a couple minuses. So we'll talk about these here. Looking at drought across the landscape here, we're seeing severe to extreme drought locally here in northern Montana and then getting into southern Alberta. Like I say, that's a multi-year drought there in southern Alberta, particularly down there in the Milk River watershed. We've also got this pocket of persistent, stubborn drought, sort of in the Red Deer, Sylvan Lake, Rocky Mountain House area. So soils are dry out there, and we've been really dry actually. If you look at our percent of average precipitation for the past 30 days, less than 40% of normal, very dry May. So actually, with this storm system, pretty significant rainfall totals, but it's actually just bringing many locations up to near average or maybe slightly above average for their May totals. But very dry out there. So that may act as a buffer initially, allowing that water to infiltrate into the soil, being largely beneficial for a lot of agricultural producers. Of course, most of southern Alberta now, the planting is complete. You get into central Alberta, I believe we're getting close to completion there as well, especially and hopefully with these warm temperatures. Most folks have seed in the ground by now. But looking at our soil moisture, percent of normal soil moisture here, again, it's getting dry out there in southern Alberta. And again, there's that pocket of dry here in central Alberta between Calgary and Edmonton. The problem with that, though, is with this long duration event is eventually you're going to lose that capacity for infiltration. You're going to start seeing more runoff as the soils become saturated. So that's one thing that we're going to have to watch. Initially have a little bit of a buffer, but over time, as the soils become saturated, especially given the long duration nature of this system, if we're seeing heavy rains after 3 days, most of that's going to be running off into our rivers and streams, perhaps pooling and ponding into low-lying areas. Another potential buffer here is the freezing level is going to be kind of near or just below the mountaintop level out there. So again, beginning into Sunday and into Monday, there's your freezing level at 700 millibars. Looks like most of the mountains are going to be below freezing, just below freezing there. So likely a lot of that precipitation is actually going to fall as snow, at least in the upper reaches of the mountains, in the high alpine there. Likely mid-slope and down, still going to be a cold rain. But in the upper elevations, that's certainly going to help. It's not the same as the 2013 situation, for instance, where you had warm rain falling on snow right up to the tops of the peaks. In this case, we see a little bit more of that slow release water as a result of snow falling up in the alpine there. As we can see here, our Canadian and European ensemble showing some snowfall here. But again, this is in the main ranges. Likely going to be seeing snow up in the alpine, but out in the kind of the eastern slopes, still likely mostly rain, granted where there's less snow to melt, but certainly a consideration there. Let's look at our freezing level. This is a kind of a confusing image to look at initially, but this is at Banff, and what you're looking at is basically the station elevation down here. Banff sits just below 1,400 meters above sea level and goes up to about 3,000 here. And we can see right now, again, super warm. This is Friday and Saturday. We're getting up to about 10 degrees Celsius near the height of most of the peaks around Banff. They would be mostly in this area right here. And so as you see, we get into the heart of that storm system on Monday. Our freezing levels drop down here into about 750 millibars. So, 2,500 meters. So the highest parts of the peak certainly going to be picking up snow through the heart of that storm event, which will certainly help. But again, a lot of that rain is still going to be falling mid-slope and downwards. So still somewhat concerning there. So again, we're going to see freezing levels come down. Certainly not a 2013 type situation where it's really warm all the way up to the peaks of the mountains. But, this is still somewhat of a buffer, but we'll see how it actually ends up playing out. So again, we've got pluses and minuses with this storm system. Again, the prolonged rains can actually make the soils become saturated. The other problem is that rivers are quite full right now, so they're not going to have much capacity to take in much more runoff. And we will be seeing more runoff, both from some snowmelt, but also just from the sheer amount of precipitation entering these river basins with this large scale rain. So with, some totals, some models indicating some totals could exceed 100 millimeters locally over 2 to 3 days. That's a substantial amount of water. So we're certainly going to be watching for some flood potential out there in southern Alberta. Again, we're going to have to listen to the experts on this and follow the advice of local authorities in the coming days and see just how significant this could play out. Because again, weather models can change. The weather situation can change. But right now, we're certainly looking at the potential for some flooding in parts of southern Alberta along our rivers, and perhaps even to the east. Again, if we see 100 millimeters in Calgary, unlikely at this point, but if you see that much rain, again, that's a lot of water coming down. I wouldn't rule out basement flooding. You got flooding in low-lying areas. Certainly would want to make sure that the downspouts are on and pointing away from your house and not toward your neighbor's basement window. This is a lot of water potentially coming. Hopefully more beneficial given the long-term drought out there. But we certainly are entering flood season. Another consideration too is, June is our wettest month. And so this first event may be more of a primer. We'll see how much flooding we see with this one. But if we see subsequent storms like this one in June, that's where we could start to see some more substantial concerns with flooding. Of course, we made some significant improvements out there to our flood infrastructure across southern Alberta since the 2013 flood. But nonetheless, something to watch here. Again, be prepared. Getprepared.ca is a great place to start looking for how to prepare for floods. And again, if you're in the city of Calgary, we have our own page here. Government of Alberta has their page as well. So we're going to have to see how this plays out in the coming days. But stay tuned. Looks like there could be some flooding potential in southern Alberta given this heavy precipitation that's on tap. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll talk to you next time.